All right. Hello, everyone, and welcome. My name is Corbin, and I'm an advisor with Hack the North. I want to thank you all for coming out to our Founding Your First Company panel. Joining us today are three panelists I'm personally very excited to hear from. First is Danielle, a co-founder and general partner of 1517, where she has worked with young entrepreneurs for about a decade. Bogdan is the first Toronto team, where he works with founders to help them go from pre-team and pre-idea to building a full seed funded company. And last but certainly not least is Joe, the CEO of Next Canada and an icon in the financial services industry with extensive experience as an executive, entrepreneur, and venture investor. Moderating this discussion will be Kartik, currently a general partner at A.Capital and one of the original co-founders of Hack the North. Without further ado, I'll hand it over to Kartik to start the discussion.
Thank you so much, Corbin. Joe, Bogdan, Danielle, thank you so much for being with us today. We have a lot of students that have a lot of questions on what it means to take your ideas to the next level. And I have a whole set of questions that I want to ask all of you. And we'll just kind of jump right in. So Corbin just gave us a brief intro on who you are and the company and the organization you represent. So maybe it'll be great for us to just get a little bit more context into what you do and what the company or the fund does. And maybe starting with Danielle, I'd love to kind of know more about 1517 and then take it for the rest of us too.
Thanks again for having me back to Hack the North. Really excited to be here. Definitely my favorite hackathon. So going to keep on that wave. But to tell a little bit more about 1517, we are a venture capital fund that focuses on working with people who are foregoing a college degree. My colleague and I started our fund directly out of the Teal Fellowship because we were on the founding team there 10 years ago, and we got to see some really extraordinary results coming out of the young people we worked with there. And we said, hey, we think we could go big or go home, and there's a lot more young people to work with than we can take within the Teal Fellowship. And so we support people with mentorship and community. We have a very active Facebook page. We do grants for young people to help them get started. And I'll probably talk more about that on the panel since that's a great way to kick things off. We have a new offering called the Invisible College, which is a $50K check to help people start R&D companies. And then our main stage capital is $250K when someone's very early stage in terms of getting some semblance of a product. They have a pilot and they need that first round of funding. So we're here to talk about that. We're a very accessible fund and very friendly. So reach out to us. Yeah.
Amazing. Thanks, Danielle. And Bogdan, maybe it'd be great to learn more about Entrepreneur First and how you got the Toronto
for sure. Thanks, Kartik. Thanks also for inviting me to this. So Entrepreneur First, I guess we call ourselves a talent investor. The reason being is that we come in very, very early on. So our thesis is that we believe that more people should be entrepreneurs and that there's a number of barriers in the way of people doing that. And so we've identified kind of two barriers that we try to remove. One is finding the right co-founder for you can be really difficult. It's most likely not someone in your immediate network. And two, it can be risky to just start doing something if you don't have a lot of money saved and don't have that kind of comfort or runway. So what we do is we bring in a cohort of people that we think are exceptionally talented individuals across a range of topics and subjects. We pay them for 3 months to work on coming up with mutually combinations of ideas that kind of draw on both co-founders. And then at the end of the 3 months, we decide whether to write a 100K pre-seed check into what they've come up with. It's very much not a product at that point. It's not a company, but it's the why you, the why now, and why this has to be clear for us to write that 100K check.
Amazing. And Joe would love to learn a bit more about Next Canada as well.
Thanks, Kartik. I would say that first and foremost, thank you for having me. I'm lucky enough to be doing this from Collingwood, Ontario. So hopefully, I don't have any further technical difficulties. I probably should have done this from Toronto. And I'm honored to be on with Danielle and Bogdan. You guys are doing great work and supporting founders that matter a lot to what we're building at Next Canada. Just to give some credence to my background as an entrepreneur, I was lucky enough to build a number of companies, Fidelity Investments from nothing to $6 billion, GT Global from nothing to 3 billion. It's now called Invesco Trimark. Synergy Asset Management, which is now called CI Financial. And then I was able to turn around a broken company called Asante Wealth Management as part of the CI deal. And then I retired and became a bit of a philanthropist and stepped off a board in 2014, something called Children's Aid Foundation, working with kids who've been abused, neglected, abandoned, and stepped off to help them turn that around. And when we were finished, I put in a new CEO and retired. And just recently, I had been a board member and a donor and a corporate partner to Next Canada when it launched back in 2010. And when the opportunity presented itself and it needed somebody to step into a leadership role, I'd already fallen in love with it right from the very onset. And so this just made sense. And the reason it made so much sense to me is I was already investing as a venture investor into companies like Coho Financial, Wealthsimple, Layer 6, Kids and Company, and whatnot. I'm just about to go big into a company called HomeWise. I really love that, and I really love the ecosystem, and I just thought if I could step in and help, we'll launch probably 100 founders a year in Next 36, Next AI, and Next Founders program, and out of that 100, we'll probably have about 60 to 80 companies. I think this year it was 72, which I think is really powerful for the ecosystem. And it really is a nation building tool because we're a philanthropic organization. We're doing this for the good of the founder, good of their business, giving them the tools and the resources that they need to build highly successful companies that are founded here, funded here, launched here, but solve global problems. So it's exciting. And I love it. And I feel really honored to have been a board member for all those years and then be involved day to day. So it's kind of cool.
That's incredible. I think the best thing about all these answers is that if you're just going to put this together, we have the full stack of going from maybe leaving college to getting a funding from a company, from a fund, to figuring out if you should start a company based on an idea, and then how do you scale that to be a global company. So I'm really happy that we have the full spectrum here on the life cycle of a company, and it'll be even more fun to dig into each of your expertise as we go in. Before I ask the next question, I want to just give a quick reminder that if you have any questions watching this, just type them up here and I'll be able to ask them to our panelists. So as you hear some interesting tidbits, just ask the question. So a lot of this is going to be focused on really young entrepreneurs and students as they should be thinking about if they're thinking about starting a company. And given that you talk to a lot of students and a lot of young entrepreneurs, are there any frameworks that you use, whether that's like a checklist or a way to see that there's a progress to be made on this, like when you can actually ask and answer when you should consider starting a company? Maybe we'll kind of go ahead with Bogdan, since you've kind of have a whole program for this. How do you think about that, and how should they think about this?
Yeah, it's a great question. I don't know if there's going to be an answer that kind of fits everyone. You kind of have to answer it for yourself. I'd say that a theme that we see with people that do really well in our program is probably the best way to put it would be like a sense of restlessness. So they might have been, a few years into doing something, whether that's a first job, whether that's a graduate degree, whether that's a postgrad, whatever it is. And it's a feeling of, I wish I could be doing more. Like I wish my work could result in more at the end of the day. And so I think that's a good sign that maybe you could consider starting something. Often it's also an insight. So we try and, when we actually evaluate candidates, we move away from asking them to, like, we don't want them to pitch ideas. We found that a lot of the best founders have like terrible ideas at the beginning. And so instead we ask them more to tell us about their insights, about how they, like, what is a belief that they have about how something will be fundamentally different in 2 or 3 years, and why do they think that? And we try and understand if they're actually giving us something that we maybe haven't heard versus kind of regurgitating something that they've read. And when we find those, that's when we try and encourage people to like take the de-risked risk of trying to start something and spend three months of focused time working on that.
Amazing. Joe, do you have anything to add to this?
Yeah, I think if the question is when should you think about starting a company, I think if you already believe that you have all the characteristics of an entrepreneur and you've a burning desire, you're ready to go, and you feel that the idea that's been germinating is a commercializable one, and it's going to set you apart. It's going to make you distinct. It's going to make you different. It's going to give you a significant runway and a deep enough moat that if you do build this and launch this, that you're going to be able to have that time that you need to really get things launched live and growing. I think that's the time. I think it's really about the founder being really ready, being mature enough, being passionate enough, having the right idea, and then going forward. I have a whole checklist of things that I look for in founders when they're coming to me for investments. But I think the answer to this question is, if you've got a killer idea and you really think it's a game changer, and you've tested it out and it's ready to go, you just go.
Great. And I know, Danielle, I want to give you the chance to answer this question too, but I'll just sort of mix this with a little bit more on your side. And I want to immerse this with a question, which is, especially as you talk to students who are thinking about dropping out and starting a company, what are some patterns you see in that approach, and what is the check or advice?
Yeah, I would say, we work predominantly with students or those who have taken the leap out of school. One thing I would say is that, especially for students, I think it's really important that they're being pulled towards something, and that it's not, entrepreneurship isn't being used as some sort of escape to get out of something you don't like. If you're like, I just don't like school, I don't like my classes, I don't like these have-tos. Oftentimes people think that entrepreneurship means you get to be your boss. No, it means your customers, your investors, the people you're working with, they're all your boss. You have more bosses than you've ever had, period. So I think being pulled towards something that's really important is key. And one of the first questions I ask founders when I'm getting to know them is, of all the things you could spend a lot of pain and suffering on, why this thing? So it has to be really important. Often I find that it's useful for the founders, especially if they can as students, to have experienced the problem in some sort of personal way. I talked to a founder yesterday who wants to do something in ag tech, but they want to work in farming. And it's very clear that they have a lot of ideas about farming, but they've never really worked in it. So oftentimes I'll say to people, hey, go get your hands dirty somewhere and keep going on this, but also do things in tandem. And actually, I also wanted to touch on Joe's piece a little bit of, how do you know when this is a business? And that really leads into the customer discovery piece. You have to be unafraid to cold email and pick up the phone and talk to people. It's one thing to think or find research on something and say, hey, there's a huge market for this. Look at this large number on a slide. It's another to know how would you get started and with who. And for us at our fund, that's really important, especially when we're writing that $250K check. We do customer diligence calls with pilots, and that is very telling to us. And oftentimes we are nearly falling in love with a team. I'm so ready to write them a check, and then we do the customer diligence piece, and it's just not there. Sometimes people will talk about, hey, this is a nice to have. I really like the founder, especially sometimes with student founders. I'll find that customers almost see themselves a little bit more like mentors, and they're like, yeah, I'm helping this person out to do their thing. And I'm like, that's really nice. But that's not what runs a business. And so really nailing down that you have something that is of dire importance to other people, that's where we see you're getting into something that is going to pull you towards having to do this, having to do it full time, and really building a company.
So
That's great. I'll let
yeah,
Joe or
Danielle,
Bogdan
it's really
add
funny you
onto
bring up that example, because we had something very similar to that happen in the last few months with one of our teams, where we had one of our internal team members join them for a customer call just to kind of shadow and see, because they hadn't really done many before. And after the call, what they had gotten out of it was, oh, great, this person that wants to run a pilot with us. And what we had gotten out of it was, this person said that they would spend some time after work hours helping you. That's not the same as wanting you as a wanting your product. That's them probably wanting to give you some mentorship on the side, which you should take, but it's not the same thing at all. So absolutely agree with you on that.
Well, Joe, if you have anything to add, please do so. If not, we can ask the next question.
I guess if I were going to add anything, it would be, I mentioned HomeWise, I mentioned Wealthsimple. Both those founders had a problem they wanted to solve. It was something that was nagging at them. In the case of Jesse at HomeWise, he was buying his home for his first home. 2 weeks of pain, paperwork, driving out to Oakville, driving back. It was a very tedious, onerous process, and he's now simplified an onerous process down to minutes and all done, electronically. So, is it powerful? Is it a game changer? I think so. Was Wealthsimple, Michael wanted to find a different way to invest his capital and felt that the market was ready for a significant change. And it was a problem that he had, so he wanted to solve for himself, and he solved it. Yes. So those are the types of things that I look for. Those are the things that excite me because they've already made a case for it themselves. And then does this apply to thousands, millions, or billions of people? And in both cases, the answer is yes. So so I stepped up. So those would be examples of things that I hope for and look for.
Amazing. So there's a handful of common themes that we get every time we do talks like these. And the question, hopefully it's a quicker answer, but obviously there's no right answer. But do you always need a co-founder, especially when you're figuring out what could be a company? And how should somebody think about that? Maybe Bogdan, you want to, or we can go with Joe.
You know what? Why don't I, because I'm probably going to be counter to others. I don't think you need a co-founder. I know a lot of businesses, they search and they make that their primary mission, but it is one of the most important decisions that you'll ever make. It's as important as who you're going to marry because you spend more time with your co-founder and the business than you sometimes do with your spouse. So unless you have somebody that you absolutely respect, trust, believe in, and they bring something really quite special to the business, I think it's just fine to go out on your own and build it on your own. Once you've got the capital and you've got the idea and it's starting to execute, you build a team around you. And I was able to do that a few times. And it's not that I don't play well in the sandbox with people. That's how I started. And I built great teams and it worked out. So I don't get too caught up on the co-founder thing, but I'd love to hear what Danielle and Bogdan think.
Yeah, I mean, the most direct answer is you don't have to have a co-founder. I agree. I think why it can help a lot is, especially in the very early stages, is if you're looking for something that's differentiated or an insight or an angle that is less likely to have been tried before, having someone else who, and importantly here, who's not a carbon copy of you or who's not very similar to you, but is somehow different in some key ways, can help you figure out what is that Venn diagram overlap that we can lean on or leverage to take a stab at something that maybe other people haven't tried or in a way that people haven't tried. So I think that's where having a co-founder can really help in that insight piece.
I guess what I would add to this is that to me, having a co-founder is one form of having a feedback loop. And I think it's really important for founders, period, to have feedback loops, whether that's customers, whether that's advisors you're talking to. Although even with advisors, I find that a little shaky because someone who's in the trenches with you is going to have different feedback than someone who is having a 10,000 foot view. So yeah, I see co-founders and early team as the people that you can really bounce things off of. One thing I would say that we've had teams that have, a majority of our teams are co-founding teams, usually equal equity splits is what we like to see between them. We have backed founders who are solo founders and who have done well with that. And what I can say though is that you can't be an army of one. And so if you're going to be a solo founder, you still need to get other people around you. And that means you need to incentivize people properly. And the issue becomes that, especially with student and first-time founders, you often don't have the capital to be able to pay a team member to not be a co-founder. So you're going to have this really high bar for, hey, who am I going to want to, be career married to, as Joe put it. And it's a very, very long-term relationship. Oftentimes, ideally, these are the types of people that you're going to want to work on multiple things with over time. But when you're getting started, you don't have the money to pay an engineer's salary. And you also need to make sure that on your team, you have, I always call it a Goldilocks problem, where you need just enough people to get started, but not too much. And so sometimes, especially with students teams, we either see too few people or too many people on the team, and you really need that sweet spot and to be able to incentivize people properly. And so we really do believe in a co-founder model if you're able to swing it, but it also shouldn't be artificial, something that you have to think about a lot.
So there's a quick follow-up from the audience, Danielle, to what you just said. Are there any specific traits that you should look at in your co-founder, or is it just best to generally answer that they are complementary to what your skill sets are, so you can have that
I think they need to bring skill sets that aren't already on the team. You don't want anything that's too superfluous. One thing I've seen a lot is there might be multiple business development people on the team when they really need more engineering on the team, for example. So you do need to have you sort of your kitchen with the right staff essentially working on it. But the other thing, though, are the intangibles, things like trust. Do you communicate well? Can you have, constructive disagreements? One thing that's kind of interesting to me is that actually we often tell teams that a co-founder, the likely place you're going to find a co-founder is through the network you already have. So we actually take a different approach than Bogdan takes, of saying hey, it's probably someone and have either worked with before or wanted to work with before. So I'm really curious how it works out on Bogdan's teams who don't know each other, and then they get in their first pickle, as it were. So I'm really curious to hear more about that.
Yeah, we actually, so I think we're actually quite aligned with what both you, Danielle, said and Joe, that it can't be an artificial thing, and it's a complex thing. And so what we do a lot of, especially in the first few months of each cohort, is almost not really pump the brakes a bit, but just emphasize the importance of the first 3 months being learning about each other, and not shipping out a product, because you need to kind of align on some of those core things. So we go through, there's the co-founder questionnaire, I think first round released it, 50 questions to ask. So stuff each person filling out, let's say in 3 years you have an offer for someone who wants to buy your company for $50 million. What do? You go through all these questions, and you compare and see where you're aligned, where you're not. And we encourage people all the time to have those difficult discussions. Financial stability is another one, because we do have people coming from way more means and people coming from less. And so understanding that for someone, it's important to have a salary of a certain level. For others, they don't care, they can go without salary for 3 years. And if you kind of kick the can on that and wait and just say yeah, we'll discuss that later, it can come back to bite you. So for sure, kind of encouraging people to have difficult personal conversations with one another. And also, I think one thing to add, when you're looking for a co-founder, if it's not someone in your immediate network, and you're just trying to get to know someone, being a good co-founder doesn't also mean being a best friend. So that's where we really try and push people to find someone who thinks differently or is not identical to you, because we tend to hang around people who are very similar to us. And so just being cognizant of that.
Absolutely. So I guess what I'm hearing is if you can have them assemble IKEA furniture together, and if they make it through that, that's a good start. And then everything else is a work in progress. So Joe, given kind of your extensive experience in seeing so many companies and also founding them, how should we think about a situation where somebody is at a place where they think they have something breakthrough, whether that's an algorithm or an idea or a new business model, and they don't really know if this is an immediately monetizable thing, but they know that there's potential in the idea or the technology. Is it always necessary to know how this will make money? And kind of how should somebody think about that?
That's almost a philosophical question. I like businesses that make money. And I mean that actually quite sincerely, because we see a lot of founders and entrepreneurs that come through our doors that want to do something that's going to, benefit society and so on. And I'm good with that, but I want to see a business that can sustain life. If you're going to take capital on and you're going to build something that's going to change the world, it needs to be able to be sustainable over time. And you've really got to focus on that. So where I worry when I see companies that are out there to do good, but they really don't have a model for financial success, I tend to shy away. I mean, I'm very philanthropic. We have a family foundation. We do a lot of good in the community. And I prefer often to see businesses that are built for some form of commercializable success. And as a founder, you will have a much bigger impact on the world, as Bill Gates is having, as Warren Buffett is having, if you build a company that is going to change the world and what it does and bring financial success. And if in your heart and your generosity, you want to change the world through your good works, you can do that at that time. I've seen a lot of failure with companies that just want to go out and do something good for the world, and there's no financial model that holds together. And so, again, I feel like I'm saying something controversial a little bit, because there are so many brilliant, altruistic young people out there, and I don't want to discourage you from, thinking about it, but make sure that you can sustain life as an entrepreneur, because you have a huge responsibility to all of your employees, your team, your customer base, and so on, your investor group. It's a huge responsibility, and sometimes people come in too bright-eyed and don't really understand the importance of sustainability of the business.
I can just add something really quick to that. I think also we're a very biased group to be asking, given that our business model is to make money off of investing in businesses. So I would also challenge anyone starting a business to think where are you getting your capital from? And we encounter this all the time, and as we work through founders' thoughts, it's maybe venture capital in our instance isn't what you need or want, and so just being aware of what is out there. And I'll also add that I think there's a difference between being solution driven or problem driven. So we tend to, our thesis is looking for people who are problem driven, and so if you are trying to understand fundamentally a problem, you'll know who it's worth solving to, and then you'll know, maybe not the details, but you'll know how it can possibly make money. Versus if you have a solution that you don't know how to monetize on, then that's a whole different can of worms.
No, absolutely. And I think I was going to ask one question from my list, but we got a really interesting question that I'll rather just merge this with is generally kind of what are some common mistakes that you see young founders make? But the twist I want to add to that is essentially, is it a bad thing if somebody is spending time to find an idea because they want to be an entrepreneur, or should ideas just come naturally to them and that's when they know that they're ready to be an entrepreneur? And maybe we'll start with Bogdan again, because this is something you spend almost all of your day on.
I think it's a muscle that you need to flex. For some people, it comes more natural than others, but I think regardless, pushing yourself to flex that muscle and come up with ideas or follow frameworks. The one that we like to use that people might have come across is once you identify your area or your right to win or something where you think broadly you have a chance to build something in, we go through belief hunch test. So figure out what is your belief on how this area will be fundamentally different in the next few years. What is your hunch on something you can do in that, and can you go out and test it really quickly? And testing it being talking to end users, customers, whatever that is, and then going back and refining. And I think it is a process that the more you do it, the better you get at it. I don't know if Danielle, if you've agreed with this, with I think you see founders probably at the stage after we do, if it holds true at that stage as well.
Yeah, I was going to say, to sort of add on to that, is that I think one of the hard parts for founders is that they don't really truly know how to iterate on something. And when someone comes to us, the thing we always say, we look at team first, then market, then product, because we know the product is going to absolutely change the most out of anything. And it means that as a team, you need to be able to be running in tandem a lot on both building, talking to customers, getting feedback, putting that feedback to work in a really, really, really quick fashion. And so sometimes we see people doing things a little too linearly. I'll do A, then I'll do B, then I'll do C. And then by the time you get to C, it's too late. It's like, oh man, you should have been doing this the whole time, and you don't have enough burn to give you like a long stretch of time to figure something out. Another thing that we see, especially with student founders, is that they think that because they've gotten sort of accolades at school or school competitions, that means they're ready to go raise venture funding. And the two are completely different from each other. And so I always tell people, like, know when you're pitching for, a school competition or a competition or pitch competition versus when you're pitching an investor, because they're just different. You can win a competition and sound really good and have it be more about oration than about the substance of the idea or about the traction you have. And then if you go to try to sell that to an investor, we're like, yo, where's your traction? How are things actually going? And if that's not there, we get lots of feedback to teams. So at 15, 17, we welcome really early conversations. But what I'll tell you is like, hey, like, go make 50 phone calls and come back to me and tell me what you learned from that. And just to, Kartik, to answer your question too, of like, what else do early founders make mistakes? And one I would say is not having hard conversations early enough. And I think this is true for a lot of first-time founders where, they hire people, but then they don't fire them fast enough if it's not working out, or you don't have the hard conversation with your co-founder about something that's not working, or with your investor, and so on. And so being able to become a really good forthright communicator is a really hard skill to learn. And it's something that we just see, like, founders have to do sort of a lot of relationship debt later. So yeah, don't do that.
It's great because all these questions are sort of blending in together now because of how natural this is flowing. And we got a question from the audience just now. And the question, maybe I'll start with Joe on this, is there's a student who has a startup here, and he says, I've heard two types of advice: pick something and get to market fast with it, or think through what is the best possible go-to-market strategy. Is this a right comparison? Is there an approach that's better than the other, and how should somebody approach that dilemma?
I have a great idea, and I find that Bogdan said earlier about flexing a muscle. I find that natural entrepreneurs, people who are born to do, and it's not that you can't teach an entrepreneur, but those folks are naturally curious. They ask a ton of questions. They think of how to solve problems. They come up with creative ideas and creative ways how to solve those problems, and maybe there's something there. So I find that it's a constant loop. Are having this dialogue with themselves and around themselves. So, and I think it's better to come to the market with an idea and make it really substantive, and it's going to create a massive global impact. And even if you go forward, and this is something that I think Danielle mentioned, and they change the idea, they pivot the idea. So one of my favorites that came through next and was an investment of mine was something called Thalmic Labs. Thalmic Labs became North, and they pivoted from this wearable tech armband to these glasses that eventually got sold to Google for quite a bit of money. I don't mind that. I'd rather you have a great idea, compelling idea, great business model, and if it's time to pivot because something's changed, something's different, something's new, I'm good with that. And I've seen that many, many, many times. So again, if you've got the right fundamental or foundation, and you've got the right team, you've got the right advisors, you've got the right capital partners, pivoting's okay. But start with a really great idea that you actually think is going to work, as opposed to something that's more pie in the sky.
That actually knocks up another question I was going to ask from the audience, so that's great. And maybe it's actually good because my next question to all of you was, can you give an example of a company that's kind of one of your favorites from the program or the fund? And you already kind of talked about Atomic Labs, another Waterloo company, which we've seen from kind of their beginning. But Bogdan, Danielle, do you have any favorites or any other really interesting stories from your time investing?
There's a more recent story that I'll tell. There's a company we have called Presso, and they started a few years ago, I think at least 3 years ago, as a hackathon project. We met them when we were out on the road, and they had this idea of there's got to be a better way to sort of clean clothes. The way they came into this problem was thinking about, hey, you go to the gym and you don't want to have this like bag of smelly stuff afterwards. What do you do with it? So this is where the idea started. It also literally started with a lamp with like heat lights on it and hair dryers kind of hanging off of the thing as their MVP. And we loved what they were doing. We loved that they, put some effort into this at this hackathon, and we gave them one of our grants, $1,000. It's non-dilutive. We have the ability to give out 100 of those a year. We said, hey, keep working on this. And the team kept working on it, and they got into HACS, the accelerator program, and they started building out, prototypes for a robotic unit. And then they got into hacks and they learned about manufacturing and what they would need to do there. But what was interesting is they kept having these guesses of, maybe this goes in a hotel, maybe this goes in the gym, this is where we start. And I can't remember how they got quite into this industry, but they got in touch with someone who works in wardrobe for film and TV production. And apparently if you are working in like costume basically, and you send a costume out for dry cleaning and it doesn't come back for some reason, you're fired. Like that is the end of your job. And so being able to keep things on site was really very appealing for these people and a major pain point. So they spent a lot of time on production sets. And now that's who they sell to, and they are just selling like crazy. They finished their pre-seed round. They're going to be opening up a seed round, sometime this year. And they have more customers than they can handle. One funny little note about this company is they're doing business now as Presso, but as young founders, they incorporated the company as Laundry Sucks Inc. on our docs, it's like, oh, we invested in Laundry Sucks. So it's been this great story for us of watching someone from the very beginning, super scrappy prototype. They've actually written a whole Medium article about it that I'll throw in the chat. They're a real company now. They're 13 people. They just got a bigger office in Atlanta, and it's just great to see them. They had to iterate a lot and figure out who really needs this, and they had never done business in this industry before, and they had to test a lot of their assumptions. But once they hooked into something that gave them that super fast feedback loop, they just kept doing it, and it's working out really well.
That's absolutely amazing.
It's a fun one.
Bogdan, do you have any stories you can share?
So I have to omit details from the current cohort because of just where they're at. I'll share one quick one there and then one from my previous work. So the one from our current cohort that I will hopefully we will all be hearing about in the coming years was a team that we loved precisely for the reason of like how they went about forming as a team and figuring out what to work on. So this was a good example of two people that we like do not think would have met otherwise had they not gone through the program. They came from very different backgrounds. One, like kind of product sales, customer facing. One, a postdoc from Mila in Montreal, and they just like knocked it, like clicked. I don't know what it was about them, but they just clicked together despite being very different personalities, and figured through their conversations, aligned on a problem where. The Mila postdoc, his background is in like sensors and deep learning and kind of hardware, and the now CEO of the company, she came from a farming background, and then went into kind of like AI product, and so they realized that the problem they zeroed in on is like the use, like how inefficient it is to monitor individual like orchard crop health as a farmer. And how laborious that is and how repetitive a process that is. and figured out that they could probably build something way better that you could just like tack onto the back of like a tractor or something that you normally have to do in the field anyway, and kind of get data, like very granular data on like what to do where in the field from a plant health perspective. So just really love that kind of buying into like overlapping of expertise to identify a problem that, Danielle, as you said, like you've experienced it firsthand. So that's an ag tech example where one of the founders like was from a farming family, and so like really understood that problem. That's probably the best example I can give without sharing more details.
Absolutely. I have a few more questions I also want to then bring on and merge them with the questions we're getting from all of our social chats. Clearly, last 12 months have been very interesting for all of us and the rest of the world. And the question is like, how has COVID changed what you do? Do you sort of think that now it's a lot more easy to start companies anywhere? It doesn't matter where you're located, or what are some downsides of this recent change? What's kind of been the impact to your business or broader impact that you see this is going to do for the industry?
I guess I'll jump in. I've noticed a few things. For our companies that had sort of a solid problem they were looking to solve, it exacerbated those problems. Like people who were working on something that that was an actual issue and not something frivolous, it made that issue even deeper. So I think for our companies that were really after something, it actually kind of made the pain point even harder in a good way for them, because that's what they were working on. It also had the effect of, for some of our founders, especially as, younger founders, what we always tell people is we want you to get on to the thing you're supposed to be doing in your career as soon as possible. And that might be this startup. It might be a next startup. It might be something else. It might be working for somebody else. It might be going back to school. Like, we are not attached to the outcome. But what we want to make sure is that people are getting onto the thing they're supposed to be doing. And so for some founders, I think COVID also helped to accelerate, hey, you know what? I'm finally ready to admit defeat and say, it's time to wrap this up. I've been working on X for 3, 4, 5 years. It's not going the way that I want. And now it's time to try to find some stability since the world is in a crisis. So I think it kind of helped people to understand where they needed to focus and put their priorities. In addition, for our own fund, we've done a lot of remote investing. So actually, we had our investor meeting last week. We did not slow down our pace of investing at all. We just kept right along with what we do, which is typically one deal a month. And yeah, we've done a lot of remote work before this with founders, working with teams. There is something that is lost in being able to meet in person with teams, absolutely. But it's also something that we are more used to at this point. So I'll pause there on that one.
Joe, Bogdan, any comments on impact of COVID and being remote now?
For us, we actually made the hard decision. We were thinking about pushing off for a year our programming, just because we felt that there might be significant risks, and then we just fought through it and said, you know what, is Canada going to be a stronger and better country if we're able to launch another 70 or 80 companies? And so with the board's approval, we move forward. And even though % remote and virtual learning, there's no question, isn't as intimate, it isn't as personal as being in the room with folks. It also changed the way some of our academic advisors were able to teach the program. We had one prof that has worked with us since day one from Harvard, who had moved with his family over to London and wouldn't have been able to come and teach live. So having that virtual aspect was powerful. Having Steve Jurvetson show up in the classroom and spend an hour talking about what he's looking for when he's investing in companies. So what happened was we didn't have the same networking and sense of community, but we also had access to people and ideas that we otherwise wouldn't have been able to tap into, because the idea of these folks flying in from London or LA or whatnot for an hour just wasn't going to happen. So now that it's accepted that having this virtual learning is okay, and because the whole world came to it at the same time, it's been much more easily accepted and adopted. So, and quite frankly, I think that we're going to always now have some hybrid of approach. The more we can bring people together, especially for bringing founding members together and finding teams, because we do that too. Despite what I said earlier, if you look at one of our most successful startups, a team called Bridget, I mean, those two very talented co-founders met each other at Next 36 in Toronto. So, I mean, that's the part that's kind of missing that we're looking forward to. But, some of the virtual learning, I think it's here to stay.
Yeah, I would echo that. The virtual learning, it just helped normalize that. I think previously, if you showed up to an event and the speaker was like dialing in on a screen, you'd feel let down or a little bummed. And now it's just completely normal. So now the question becomes who's the best speaker or who's the best person to lead a workshop rather than who's the most accessible to us. And so we ran numerous events leading into like our global network to where we had someone dial in, and that was very normal. Yeah, I mean, we set up, launched, and ran our first cohort in Toronto fully remote during the pandemic. So definitely had our doubts, but it turned out that like the talent and the thirst that people have is still there. It doesn't change. So it's just a matter of finding ways to like deliver on things or address things in a more flexible way.
Absolutely. I mean, look at us here right now. We're all in different cities around the world, and doing an event with students from about 50 countries. So there are definitely a lot of benefits. I want to go into some audience questions now as we wrap up. And what I'll do is I'll just kind of phrase the question, and we can have either one of you or all of you answer. So I'll just keep it open-ended. Whoever wants to jump in and go for it. So the first one of the questions we have is, what are some of the benefits, or how should somebody think about working full-time while starting a company? Like, do you need to quit your job to be able to go in, or can there be a better framework on deciding when do you actually leave your full-time job and fully roll into the new venture?
Yeah, I can kick this one off. I mean, I think it's all well and good to be thinking of things while you have a full-time job. Like, absolutely, why not? Our stance on who we admit to the program and who we back is you need to be fully in it. Like, it's going to take up way more than a single job's worth of work. And so there's no way around it. And so if you want to spend, a couple of years simmering on things or like hashing things out while you have a job because you need that security, that's fine. But if you want to go raise money on it, I think not showing that you're actually full-time is going to be an eyebrow raiser for a lot of investors, and probably a no for most.
Yeah, well, what we would want to see is that by the time a team is coming to us for investment, maybe they're raising something like 500K to $1 million, we're going to want to see that they're ready to go full-time on it. But we definitely understand you have to make ends meet before then. And so if you're, sort of doing the nights and weekends thing, or all this copious time not driving around places, getting started is one thing. But I think as soon as a founding team takes money from investors, we do expect that your main work focus is going to be the startup.
Yeah, I would.
I'll go.
Oh, sorry.
Please.
No, I was just going to say.
No, please go ahead.
It's really, I think it's really important. In those times where I was doing my own startups, it's really difficult. It's really hard, and you have a lot of sleepless nights. You are on 24/7. So trying to balance a job at Royal Bank and doing a startup, it's just too hard. If you're truly passionate, if you truly are committed to solving the problem that you want to solve and having a massive impact, if you're really all in, you got to be all in. And if you aren't, people will know. Your team will know. Your investor group will know. Your advisor group will know, because you're kind of doing it half-assed. You're mailing it in. To be great, you have to be fully committed. And I really think if you choose to be an entrepreneur, you're choosing a really difficult path, one that's full of tremendous rewards, and there's lots of excitement, and it's a beautiful career path. But man, it's a tough one.
Absolutely.
I want to add a little thing, because I think just the theme of the panel, I think this is a pretty critical question, given that it's about people wanting to start their first company. I think there's two other aspects to this. So one is it's not we're not machines, so we can't just think of it as from an hours perspective of, I would work a regular job 40 hours, I could therefore work 60 hours on the startup, and all my other time is like eating and sleeping. That's fine. It doesn't work that way. You're gonna have times where the work you need to do is just clear headspace, and you can't be doing another job and be thinking about your startup at the same time. And so you're doing yourself a disservice by putting yourself in that position. And then from the more like just commercial standpoint is just being outcompeted. So you can assume at any given time that there's probably someone else working on a very similar thing to you, and chances are they're doing it full time. And so there's like a certain level of over arrogance to think that I can work another job and do this, and I'll definitely be better than anyone else working on the problem.
No, it's a really good point. There's a question. I mean, I'll kind of preface this question by given kind of how each of you operate. There's different return profiles and expectations, and basically the question is like, does every idea need to be world changing in $1 billion business? What if somebody wants to start a company that's a collectible toys business? Like, there's a difference between an entrepreneur, $1 billion business, and a business owner. How should somebody think about that? And any advice you?
Yeah, I'll jump in here. I think something terrible has happened where people think that starting a business means starting a startup. And the definition of a startup is one that has scalability to it. And when you talk about venture scalability, we're talking about, the general venture model is that out of our, 40 team portfolio, that one or two of them might financially make up for all the learning opportunities of all the other founders. And so it means that it's very rare that someone starts a venture scalable startup and succeeds at it. Yet what doesn't seem rare today is that people think that any business should therefore fit into that model. And I think a person can have a very successful career starting a smaller, medium-sized business. That's how I started out, and I was very satisfied with my work. And I think I felt lucky that I didn't sort of grow up in this particular culture of, I had a tutoring business to start, and people weren't like, how are you going to scale it? How are you going to get 75,000 tutors on board? How are you going to do this? It was like, it was me. I was a one-woman band, and I did it, and I made money, and it was fine. And sometimes it's fine to start there. And then I got into more scalable stuff over time, but not everything has to be a venture scalable business, nor is it meant to be, or is it structured to be that way. And I do wish that there were more funding models to help people to start smaller businesses, like getting small business loans and things like that are really hard. So I do hope that there's more innovation to help people to start smaller yet profitable businesses in the future.
Another kind of hopefully a quick one here is the question is, does it matter if I work at a really well-known company before starting my business, and will that credentialing be important? Any advice or comments on this? Maybe Joe or Bogdan, how do you think about that?
I think if you are working at a company that's well known, that gives you a small advantage. If it's a company that's well known and is a startup, and you're leaving that startup and you've watched for the 18 to 36 months that you were there, all the machinations as the company went from its infancy to its seed round to Series A, and you've got this idea, it's bursting to come out of you, and you leave to go start something, then I think, yeah, if there's a brand, that helps. But you've had this great front row seat at all the things that need to be done well or done right. And then when you go out to launch your business, your idea, you've had a massive amount of learning all at one time. I'm not sure if that's answering the question fully and completely. If the question is, should I have a job at Sun Life? Then no, I don't think that's going to give you a significant advantage unless you're building something that's going to be a direct competitor to Sun Life. So I will give you one example. This is a brilliant female founder. She built and launched a company called Minerva AI. And what Jen did was she spent a decade working at financial institutions And she created, so the anti-money laundering business is a necessity for all financial institutions worldwide. The average investigation is 8 hours. So you think there's an anti-money laundering problem, you spend all this time doing an investigation, and you put the idea forward. She's now taken that using artificial intelligence from 8 hours to 8 minutes. So that's an example of, yes, she worked at BMO, and now she's able to provide BMO or CIBC or Scotia, JP Morgan with this technology. So in that case, I would say it really helped her a lot because she had all this wisdom accumulated after all those years and applied it to using this really cool new technology.
Yeah, I would say, like, just to add on to that, I absolutely agree. I think not enough people, everyone comes from a different background and has different constraints. I don't think enough people ask themselves, like, why am I doing this? So if you want to go to like a Google or an Apple or a Facebook, and it's because you need the financial stability for a couple of years and you want to do something, like you're an engineer and you're good at it and you want to make money, then like by all means do that. But I think the mistake that people make is thinking, I need to go there to start a company, when in fact maybe you need to go and spend time in a different industry, or maybe you need to go and see how a medium-sized company scales, or maybe you need to go join as an early employee. Like, it depends on what you're trying to achieve. And I think the mistake is that I need to go to like a FANG company, Facebook, Apple, and Netflix, like one of those companies, to learn these things. And the answer there is I don't think you do.
That makes a lot of sense. And this is maybe touching on some of the answers in the past Danielle and Joe have given. A student is interested in starting a sustainability startup. And the question is, like, how do you think about fundraising for a social enterprise? And this sort of touches on, should everything be venture scale or not? Do you have any advice or comments on social enterprise businesses?
I have a specific example. So as much as I said, I worry that, is it going to be financially successful longer term, which I think is an imperative. So one of the companies that just came through next, 4 mechatronics engineers from SFU. The company's called Moment. And what they do is they take used electric car batteries. So they just did a deal with Nissan. And what they are able to do is they're able to go into smaller communities. So in the case of their first example, it's an indigenous community, remove the diesel generator, replace it with this used electric car battery, and reduce the carbon footprint, reduce the cost, reduce the smell, reduce all kinds of different characteristics. And they've got I think, a socially responsible, important clean tech business that is also reusing batteries that are going to end up in landfill. So is this a great socially responsible business? 100%. Is this a business that has application across Canada? Undoubtedly, because there's so many small communities. But it's also globally scalable. You could imagine this in Pakistan. You can imagine this in India. So yeah, I would say that's something I would, food for thought.
Danielle, if there's any comments, love that. If not, I think everything Joe said makes total sense. It's totally fine to be in that industry. You just have to still think about how can this be set up in a way where you're not at the helm of relying on external funding to keep it going, even if the growth is not exponential or it's longer than what enterprise software startup would do. I'd like to wrap it up now, so I'll have 2 kind of remaining questions for you. The first one, or the second last question here is, all of you have had your own ventures and experiences starting something in the past. If you were to go back in time and give some advice to yourself when you were getting started, what would that be? Maybe Bogdan, we can start that with you, and then Joe and Danielle.
Yeah, it's a little tricky for me because my experience in an early stage team was in a biotech spin-out. And so the advice I want to give, it doesn't really work in that scenario, because in a biotech, you kind of know what novel compound you're doing and what disease it maybe tackles. But the advice I'd give, just based off of seeing like many dozens of founders go through our program, is start your customer discovery earlier than you think. It's easy to fall into the trap of just like starting to build something, especially for kind of like engineer hacker types who love like building. I'd say start talking to people way earlier than you think, because that'll really inform what direction you go in.
Amazing. Joe?
Yeah, I agree with that. I think that's a really good insight. As I said earlier, I find most really natural entrepreneurs are also naturally curious people, and they want to solve problems. But really trying to identify, is this a problem worth solving? Is this something worth funding? That's a whole other thing. My advice, and one of the things that I really hope for and look for as an investor is I look for a founder who has a really, really, really credible team. And so if you want to call that co-founders, but it's also just the team that they're surrounding themselves with. I'm looking for character and integrity. I'm also then looking for advisory board. I find really talented, humble, in most cases, founders also surround themselves with incredibly talented advisors, and they're willing to give out equity to have that beautiful group of people that bring with them wisdom and experience from their time as an entrepreneur or time in industry. I also look at smart money. There's dumb money, there's uninteresting money, and then there's smart money. I really do look for, and that was one of the things I had the benefit of in my startups, is having really smart money. I just think it's a really important relationship. And if you take money because it's money, that can also come back and bite you down the road, especially if you get into hard times or a bear market, because it's not always like this. You really want money that the characteristics of that money, the integrity, the character of the VC fund or the investor group is very much aligned with you, and their time horizon is aligned with yours. It's so important. If you get that wrong, it can end in disaster.
Danielle, before you had an answer, I just add that definitely do your homework too if you're talking to investors. Like, don't assume that investors are just doing diligence on you. Like, go on their website, figure out who they've invested in, and like call some of those companies up or email them and just ask for a reference. Like, every investor is going to have a different flavor, and so I think the misconception that entrepreneur, they're doing you a favor, like you're also doing them a favor because that's how their business runs. So pick up the phone and call and ask what it's like to work with an investor. Sorry, Danielle.
No, it's all good.
No, smart, really
I
smart
guess
advice.
the last thing I would add is that I know we're talking about the early stage here, but the early stage leads into the mid stage, leads into the later stage. And just the reminder of that, it's a marathon, not a sprint. And I think we often think, oh, when I reach this milestone, then I can sort of calm down a little bit on what I'm doing. But it's just not true. It keeps getting harder and harder and harder. It doesn't actually get easier. So you really need to think about how you're going to go a really long distance in something in a really sustainable way to you as a person, and be able to have your priorities and know what's a priority for you and your business and what's not, and be able to triage those things as fast as humanly possible. And if you get good at that early, then you stay good at it later. But it's really hard to make the switch of sprinting all the time, saying yes to everything, to finally learning, okay, wait, it's totally okay not to get to inbox 0. It's okay to not say yes to X. So yeah, marathon over sprint.
Yeah. Focus is the key. And last, I want to end with a question to all of you, which is how can students get in touch with you, and when should they think about getting in touch with you based on the different things that each of you do? So maybe with Bogdan, when is the right time to get in touch with EF? Oh, looks like we're missing some audio, unless it's on my end.
Oh, I can't hear Bogdan.
There we go.
Oh, we lost him. Oh, we can jump in.
He might just be joining.
Yeah, sure.
Please go ahead, Danielle.
People can reach out to us on our contact form at our website. You're also welcome to email me. We work with people in different ways through our community. When someone's really a maker before they are becoming a founder, we love hearing from people. If you're looking for investment, we do like to see that some sort of pilot is in place, some sort of product is assembled. But we really do believe in building relationships early with founders, because the way that we make our decisions is off of narrative data points that we have over time. The worst case scenario for us is when someone comes to us on a Wednesday and wants money by Friday. That's not really what we do. I also threw my email in the chat, Danielle at 1517fund.com. So be in touch.
Can you hear me now?
Yep.
Cool.
Yeah.
Yeah, I'm also adding the website and my email in the chat. But basically, if you think you are ready to start something and you don't have a very specific idea that you absolutely want to work on, and you don't have like a co-founder to work with, that's probably the right time to get in touch with EF. So I threw in the email on the website. We're starting our next cohort in April of this year. We run 2 per year. So if you feel ready to apply like in this month, awesome. If you want to wait several months and give it a go in September, then that also works.
Amazing. And then Joe.
So a couple things. Our intake for Next 36 is in October, November. So you would want to apply throughout the summer. We make our final decisions usually the last weekend of November. Next AI, we do a lot of our vetting through December, January. We make our final decisions in January. And then Next Founders, companies that are launched and live, we make our decisions in March. And our programming really goes from January, but really in earnest March through August, September. So, and the person to get in touch with would either be Lisa Klemenko, she's the head of our recruitment, and or Alex McGregor, who's our head of programming, or myself. And I'll put my address in the chat, but it's joe.canavan@nextcanada.com. And truly, we would love for those of you who are passionate entrepreneurs and big problems they want to solve to apply to our program. As I say, it's a charitable endeavor organization, and we just really want to move the needle, supporting Canadian founders, because we just have so much power in this country, so much knowledge that we want to harness, so many great ideas, and we want to really, because I think Canada's only in the second inning in terms of growth of startups. And it's just, the next 10 years are going to be Canada's time. It's going to be a really powerful period for growth and ideation. And we know with 700 alumni, the important role that we are able and are fortunate to play. So please, if you have that burning desire and you would like, it really is like an advanced degree in entrepreneurship, love to have you apply to our programs.
Joe, Bogdan, Danielle, thank you so much for giving us your time today. I'm sure you'll get a lot more emails from hundreds of students watching this and the thousands from this event. We really appreciate the hour.
Thanks for having us.
Yeah, thanks for having us.
All right. Bye-bye.